He shuffled in with the others, wrists chained, coat threadbare, boots that had seen jungle, desert, and now, cracked sidewalks. His back was slightly bent, but the spine was still there. That stubborn Marine spine that refused to break, even when everything else had. The bailiff called out names with the flat rhythm of routine. Mason Quinn. He raised his head. Sergeant. United States Marine Corps. The room stilled. Judge Olivia Parker froze, pen hovering midair. Something tightened in her throat. The name. That name. She stared at the man before her. Gray hair, unshaven jaw, fingers worn to bone. He stood like a man who no longer expected to be seen. A murmur moved through the room. Just another homeless vet, someone whispered. Trespassing, maybe. Loitering. One of those cases. Parker said nothing. Her gaze didn't leave him. The case file sat unopened on her bench, charges from 2 nights ago. An officer had found him behind a closed cafe, wrapped in a torn sleeping bag, sitting in the wind. He hadn't fought. Hadn't begged. Just stood when they asked him to. The judge leaned forward now. Quietly clicked her pen shut. Mason Quinn, she said again, slowly. He nodded once, the motion stiff from age. A name surfaced in her mind. A letter, folded 4 times. From her brother, James, a Marine officer who died in Fallujah. The letter mentioned a man. A sergeant who had carried him from fire. Mason Quinn. A ghost from another life. That was 20 years ago. Her brother never came home. But Quinn had. And now he stood in chains in her courtroom, unrecognized, forgotten. Parker drew in a breath. Shallow. Sharp. She looked down at the file. Then up again. Something had gone terribly wrong. And now the weight of a broken system had walked through her door wearing a Marine silence. She did not strike the gavel. Not yet. Vietnam was red clay and monsoon rain. Iraq was fire and sand. But home was paperwork and silence. Mason Quinn came back both times with less of himself. Left some in the rice paddies. More in the streets of Fallujah. The rest, he carried like a weight no one could see. He had served with honor. His record said so. Commendations for valor, 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star. But there was no ceremony when he came home the second time. No one waiting at the gate. Just a government form and a folding chair at the VA. He filled out the wrong box. Missed a deadline. The system lost his discharge papers, twice. His benefits were under review for 11 months before they vanished entirely. At first, he called every week. Then once a month. Then he stopped. He didn't have the strength to argue anymore. His wife had left after Iraq. Said she couldn't live with the silence, the staring at walls, the rage that surfaced without warning. His kids were grown. One sent a card last Christmas. The other changed his number. Mason drifted from city to city. Always near military bases. Always close to people who might understand the smell of diesel and blood in the same breath. But even among veterans, he kept to himself. He slept in shelters when there was room. Beneath bridges when there wasn't. He carried his medals in a torn shaving kit until they were stolen from a locker. He never reported it. "They're not mine," he once said to another man at the shelter. "They belong to the dead." Some remembered him. A few would nod when he passed by the VFW, but no one asked his story. He still walked like a Marine. Shoulders squared, even beneath the layers of coats and the ache of arthritis. He helped stack chairs after meetings. Fixed a broken furnace once, without being asked. Ate only if there were leftovers. His jacket, an old field coat from his second deployment, still had the faint imprint of a rank patch long since torn away. It was the only thing he kept in good condition. Then came the winter. It hit hard. Nights dropped below freezing. Mason's sleeping bag soaked through one night behind a diner. He got sick. Coughed blood into a napkin and threw it into a trash bin, quietly. He didn't ask for help. 2 days later, he was found behind a cafe, curled against a wall for warmth. The manager called it in as trespassing. Police arrived. They told him to move along. He tried. His legs wouldn't work right. The younger officer, impatient, wrote up a citation. When Mason asked for 5 minutes to catch his breath, they cuffed him. He didn't resist. They called it refusal to comply. Listed him as uncooperative. He was booked and given a court date. A public defender glanced at his file and made a note, homeless, no priors of violence, minor disturbance. Another forgotten name on the docket. He sat in holding that night staring at a concrete wall, tracing the names of men he'd buried in foreign soil. He whispered a few of them aloud. Names that had not been spoken in years. Names that once mattered. When the guard came to wake him for court, Mason stood slowly. Pulled on the coat. Adjusted the collar. Name? The officer asked again. Mason Quinn, he said. Then added quietly, Sergeant. United States Marine Corps. He didn't say it for recognition. He said it because it was still true. Even now. The charges were small on paper. Trespassing. Failure to comply. Vagrancy. But in Fairview Municipal Court, even small charges added up to sentences that took more than time. The prosecutor was young. His suit too crisp, his voice too loud. He spoke as if Mason were a line item on a budget, an inconvenience clogging up the docket. The defendant, he said, was found sleeping illegally behind a commercial property, refused to vacate when instructed, and has no fixed address or visible means of support. We recommend county remand until trial. Judge Parker said nothing at first. Her face gave away little. But inside, her mind was unraveling threads from 20 years ago. Mason stood quietly, wrists still shackled. His boots left faint streaks on the worn tile. He didn't speak. Didn't meet the prosecutor's eyes. Just listened. Like he had done for most of his life. His public defender, a woman with kind eyes but a mountain of files, spoke briefly. My client is a decorated veteran. He wasn't panhandling or creating a disturbance. He was simply trying to stay warm. He has no record. No history of violence. The prosecutor shrugged. Intent doesn't change the law. The business has a right to refuse loiterers. Loiterer. That word again. The word used to erase context. To strip away the life beneath the coat, the name beneath the file. Parker looked down at the page before her. Then flipped the folder closed. She'd seen the surveillance stills. Mason sitting motionless against a brick wall, arms crossed, coat zipped to the chin. Not asleep. Just breathing. Waiting for morning. But the charges weren't about behavior. They were about visibility. He was visible in the wrong place, at the wrong time. And someone had felt uncomfortable. That was enough. If convicted, even for a misdemeanor, he'd be restricted from public shelters, blocked from several food programs, and marked for automatic detention if found loitering again. He would lose the few places he had left. It wasn't a sentence of days. It was a sentence of erasure. Parker looked up. Mr. Quinn, do you have anything you wish to say before I make a determination? He raised his head. His voice was steady, but hollow. No, ma'am. She studied him. Saw the hollow in his cheeks. The way he stood to attention despite the weight. Saw something else, too, something that didn't belong in a courtroom built to process, not to see. This man had once stood between bullets and her brother. And now he stood between memory and silence. The courtroom fell still. She asked the clerk for a recess. Her voice was calm, but her hand trembled as it held the gavel. When she left the bench, she carried Mason's file in one hand, and something else in her chest. A weight she didn't know she'd been carrying until that moment. She walked to her chambers. Closed the door. Took a breath. Then opened a drawer she hadn't touched in years. The letter was still there. Her brother's last. Dated 2 weeks before he died in Anbar province. The handwriting was sharp and precise, like always. It described a night patrol, an ambush, an explosion. He'd been pinned in a Humvee. Flames licking the seats. Screams outside. One line had stayed with her all these years. A man named Quinn pulled me out. I was already bleeding out. He didn't flinch. Just dragged me through fire like he'd done it 100 times before. If I don't make it, find him. She had never found him. Until today. Back in the courtroom, the young prosecutor was still rearranging papers, unaware that something larger than his script was unfolding. Mason remained still. His hands, bound, rested loosely in front of him. He didn't look at anyone. He had long since stopped expecting to be seen. But Olivia Parker saw him now. Not the charges. Not the file. She saw the man who had once made a choice in the middle of war to save another life, hers, by extension. And she knew, with a certainty that went deeper than law, that he did not belong in a cell. He belonged to a story they had all tried to forget. And she would not forget again. She waited until the courtroom emptied for lunch. A clerk stacked documents in a corner. The young prosecutor chatted with a colleague, oblivious. Judge Parker stepped down from the bench. No robe. Just a woman now, older, shoulders tenser than she remembered. In her chambers, she reopened the letter. Find him. The words blurred slightly as she touched the edge. She retrieved a box from the corner of a low cabinet, personal files, mostly forgotten. Inside, wrapped in tissue, a photograph. Her brother, James, standing beside 2 other Marines, covered in dust. One man had his arm around James. Mason Quinn. Younger, but unmistakable. The same eyes. Same posture. Silent. Watching. She brought in a man from the Veterans Legal Defense Network, Tom Keller, an attorney she trusted. He arrived within the hour, suit rumpled, tie loose, the air of someone used to last-minute calls and complicated names. Parker handed him Mason's file and the photo. I need you to handle this, she said. Not as a favor to me. As a debt. Keller read the letter. Looked at the man in the photo. He didn't ask questions. He nodded and walked into the hall. Back in the courtroom, Mason sat alone. He had not asked to speak with a lawyer. He had not asked for a phone call. He had asked for nothing. When Keller sat beside him, Mason turned his head slightly. You know me? He asked, voice low. I do now, Keller said. No one's known me in a long time. Keller nodded once. Then opened the folder. Let's fix that. Outside, the bailiff returned. Judge Parker re-entered. Something had shifted. It was subtle, but real. The prosecutor rose. Expected the script to resume. Instead, Parker spoke. This court recognizes new counsel for Mr. Quinn. Proceedings will continue shortly. The courtroom refilled with bodies. But now the energy was different. Quiet. Intent. A few veterans in the back row had arrived, men who had heard whispers. A Marine colonel in uniform stepped through the door and sat silently in the gallery. A VA rep leaned against the wall. Mason did not turn around. He stared straight ahead. Then Parker said his name. Fully. Sergeant Mason Quinn. He stood, hands unclasped now. Keller had argued for the chains to be removed. The judge had granted it. Parker spoke slowly. This court acknowledges that Mr. Quinn served 3 combat tours, including Vietnam and Iraq. That he was awarded the Bronze Star for valor, and other citations for conduct under fire. She paused. Looked toward the colonel. The man rose. He held a small box in both hands. This is Colonel Matthew Langston, United States Marine Corps. He has something for Mr. Quinn. A hush swept the room. The colonel stepped forward. Mason Quinn, he said. For extraordinary heroism in combat operations against enemy forces in Anbar Province, Iraq, this office recognizes your actions as meeting the standard of the Navy Cross. He opened the box. Inside, polished and heavy, the metal gleamed. Mason's lips parted slightly. But he said nothing. The colonel pinned it gently to Mason's coat, right over the heart. And then something no one expected happened. Veterans began to stand. One by one. Slowly. Then civilians. Even the young prosecutor rose, confused, but compelled. A quiet salute. No music. No fanfare. Just silence and upright backs. Mason looked around. Not in pride. In disbelief. As if something once thought buried had found breath again. And in the eyes of the judge, he saw not pity. Not charity. But recognition. She remembered. The metal lay heavy on his chest, unfamiliar and cold. For a moment, Mason stood without breath. The court was still. He turned, not to the judge, not to the colonel, but to the back row, where an old man in a VFW jacket lifted 2 fingers to his brow. A silent salute. Returned. Then the judge spoke again. This is not ceremony, she said. Her voice had weight now, like stone breaking water. This is restoration. She read aloud from the original recommendation for the Navy Cross. A citation lost to red tape, misfiled during a transfer in 2006. A document long buried until Keller had pulled it from a box marked, closed. Under direct enemy fire, Sergeant Quinn voluntarily exposed himself to danger to retrieve wounded Marines from a burning vehicle. His actions saved the lives of multiple service members and demonstrated unwavering commitment to duty and sacrifice. There was no defense against that. The prosecutor sat down. No objection. No argument. I wasn't trying to be brave, Mason said. It was the first time he'd spoken since the metal touched his coat. I just didn't want them to die. Parker leaned forward. My brother was one of them, she said. And for the first time in years, Mason's eyes flinched. James Parker, she added. He wrote about you. Called you the calm in the storm. I remember, Mason said quietly. He kept photos of his kids in his helmet. She nodded once. He never stopped talking about you. Even in his last letter. A long pause. I thought I failed him, Mason said. No, she answered. You gave us more time. In the gallery, a woman dabbed at her eyes. A man reached for his wallet, pulled out an old black and white photo. Passed it to another man. Wordless gestures. Silent reverence. Then Parker continued. This court finds the charges against Mr. Quinn vacated. Immediate dismissal. Additionally, this court issues a directive to the Department of Veterans Affairs to reinstate and backdate all applicable benefits to the date of their termination. A motion for permanent housing under the Veterans Dignity Act is hereby approved. Mason didn't respond. He couldn't. He was still listening for something. Some sound to make it real. Keller stepped beside him. "You'll have your own place again," he said quietly. "A place where your name is on the door." Mason turned slightly. "That hasn't happened in a long time." The judge stood. "I have one more thing for you." She stepped down from the bench and crossed the courtroom floor with something wrapped in aged paper. It was a bundle of letters. Her brother's. "They're yours," she said. "He wanted you to have them." Mason took them with both hands. Held them as if they might crumble. His fingers shook as he opened the top one. He didn't read it aloud. But he smiled, faintly. As if something inside had been waiting for these words to come home. And then, softly, like a man touching earth after a long fall, he whispered. "I didn't know anyone remembered." The courtroom was quiet. But now, every soul inside it did. The apartment was quiet. Not the sterile kind that echoes, this was the kind built for stillness. For recovery. For presence. A second-floor walk-up near the old Fairview Armory, just off a quiet street with peeling shutters and lilac bushes that bloomed each spring. Mason Quinn stood in the doorway with the key still in his hand. It didn't feel real. He hadn't turned a key in a door of his own in over a decade. Inside, 2 rooms, a kitchenette, a radiator that rattled politely when the heat kicked in. A worn but clean recliner faced the window. On the small dining table, a folder from the Department of Veterans Affairs, a hot meal wrapped in foil, and a folded American flag, his flag, placed with solemn precision. He took one step forward and let the door shut behind him. No one had asked for proof of address. No one had questioned if he deserved it. It was his. Entirely, irrevocably, his. The box that arrived the next morning bore no return label. Inside, his medals, recovered from a pawn shop 2 counties away. A volunteer had found them, traced the ribbons, matched the engraving, returned them without fanfare. He held them one at a time. Bronze Star. Purple Heart. Service medals from 2 wars and a peace that had never come. They were cold in his hand, heavier than he remembered. He didn't display them. Just placed them in the drawer next to his bed, stacked neatly on top of a sealed envelope, the judge's letter from that day in court. A week later, Judge Parker knocked on his door. She wore no robe. Just a plain navy coat, a scarf pulled tight around her neck. She held 2 things, a tray with 2 coffees and a manila envelope. "Can I come in?" she asked. He nodded. They sat at the table. She placed the envelope between them. "These belong to you," she said. "Letters. From James. Some were written after that last deployment. They never made it to you." Mason took the envelope with care. His hands, thick and calloused, trembled just slightly. He opened the top one. "Read the first line silently." Then again. He did not cry. He only blinked once, slowly, as if adjusting to a light that had been turned on after years of darkness. "You never forgot him," he said. "I couldn't," she answered. "And I never forgot what he wrote about you." He nodded. That was enough. They sat without speaking for a while. When she finally rose to leave, she paused at the door. "My work in veterans justice started because of you," she said. "I didn't know it, but it was always because of you." That night, Mason placed the letters in the same drawer with his medals. He kept them wrapped in soft cloth, like something sacred. The days grew steadier. He went to the VA each week, routine checkups, a therapist who didn't push. He began volunteering at the Veterans Food Bank, sorting crates, offering quiet nods to men who looked the way he once had, lost, unseen, weathered by silence. The stories came slowly. A journalist requested an interview. Mason declined. A local historian asked to film a documentary. He declined that too. But he agreed to speak at a high school. In the auditorium, under dim lights, before rows of quiet students, he stood without notes. No uniform. Just the old jacket, now mended, patches replaced, zipper working again. "I won't tell you about war," he said. "You can read about that." He paused. Looked down for a moment. "I'll tell you something else. Sometimes people vanish in plain sight. And sometimes, the worst wound isn't one you can see, it's being forgotten." He didn't speak long. Just enough. Afterward, a teenage boy walked up, eyes wide. "My granddad was in Vietnam," he said. He never talked about it. Mason placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Maybe now he will." The next day, Mason received a letter from the VA, full restoration of benefits. Back pay approved. Access to housing, healthcare, mental health support. The final line read: "Case reopened. Status, honorably restored." He pinned the notice on the wall beside the window. Each morning, light spilled over it, soft, golden. Not dramatic. Just enough to see by. He started keeping a small notebook. Not a diary, just names. Friends. Platoon mates. Men who hadn't made it home. Each day, he wrote one down. Said it aloud. Just once. A kind of roll call. For memory. For justice. He bought a flagpole. Planted it in the modest garden beneath his window. Each sunrise, he stepped outside. Raised the flag slowly, deliberately. No one saluted. No music played. But still, he raised it. He remembered. And now, others would too. Someone remembered my name.